Welcome, everybody, to Bootsie Radio. It's your host, Bootsie. I'm here with everybody's favorite delegate so far, right now, Fiji Grande. I'm saying your name right,
That
right?
is correct, but you are far too
Okay,
kind.
okay. I was very nervous. I was going to say it wrong, um, just because I'm always nervous with everyone's pronunciations.
Well, thanks for
So,
asking,
Fiji.
but you've got it right.
So, Fiji, you've been in the office for how long has it been now? It's just
I
been a few days.
it's been a couple days actually, not a couple years. It was I think the 11th when it technically closed, but then results were announced on the 12th, and that's when I took seat.
Gotcha. Well, welcome to the delegacy. Sort of. I mean, we still don't have your. You're still not the end game delegate, which we're trying to work on that. Um, but delegate transitions are always difficult, especially here in the North Pacific, just because the amount of endorsements here is a lot. Whereas in a region such as, our other feeder regions that, have the delegate so high up and everybody else super low, it's a little bit easier with transitions. So, but you've done very good on endorsing. You're also a security counselor now, so you're all kinds of fun, aren't you?
That's the hope, yeah. So right now I'm sitting at 949 endorsements by my last count, and since taking sort of offsite office, so to speak, because I'm not technically in-game delegate yet, I've risen by about I don't know, like 75 endorsements, I think. And since becoming a security counselor, it's more like 100, 120-ish, which is definitely, progress and whatnot. But I think it's actually been slower than usual due to concerns over our Keeper of the North programs with cards and sort of keeping that track record going. So that's something that's definitely slowing the transition, and is something that I think we're going to have to overcome by either changing policy this time or just by pushing through it and have Powith just keep on shooting puppies or something.
I wasn't exactly expecting the sentence to end that way, so well then. But yes, you're correct. The Keeper program, obviously, WADEP, or the World Assembly Development Program. I mean, it's been very helpful in obviously getting endorsements for the Security Council and the region as a whole. However, you're right. The Keeper program, which is an extension of WADEP, people are going to die when they hear the pronunciation of that acronym, but whatever. Um,
Yeah, I say WADP, but, whatever.
right. I tend to try to pronounce acronyms as much as possible, even when it doesn't make sense for them to be pronounced, such as WADA. But anyway, you're correct. The Keeper program has definitely, we may need to look in terms of, hey, we want you to endorse the new delegate, but the old delegate is a security counselor, so how are we going to address them,
For
as
what it's
part of
worth, I don't. This is
Keeper
not
program?
intended as a criticism of the program overall. It's just something that I think needs to be recalibrated during transitions.
Right. Yeah. And hopefully we can get our, external programs updated to reflect that. Just because a lot of the programs and stuff are run by, you know, Ren's server. So, I mean, I'm sure it's technically possible because, Ren and Ilu are very, very technically savvy in terms of that. So hopefully we can get that updated as quickly as possible. And I'd be definitely up for that change because it doesn't make sense for us to, hey, don't endorse Pelith, but you have to endorse him to be a keeper. So yeah. So yeah, that's definitely something we'll have to look at. So, what made you pick your different ministers? Did they approach you? Did you kind of have people in mind when you were running, or how did that process occur for you?
When it came to the ministers that I had in mind, I definitely had a few people in mind long in advance, such as Marcus Antonius for Home Affairs. And so I approached him quite a bit in advance. Interestingly, I had originally chosen BMW Surfer for the Ministry of Communications, and had been training him for that position about 1 month before the delegate election. If I had lost the election, I would have planned to keep serving as Minister of Communications, but I figured on the off chance that I do win, I should have a plan for who should take over in my stead. So I was training BMW Surfer for quite some time, but he came to me at one point and said basically, it turns out that real life concerns in the next term are going to be more pressing than they usually are, and I just won't be able to serve in the same capacity. And honestly, I really respect him for just saying that, because it meant that I was able to swiftly redirect my plans for that ministry, get a new minister in place who can serve the needs of the region to the extent that is possible, and it just means that BMW Surfer is a bit more reliable than I would have otherwise thought. So I'm definitely respectful of him for that. As for who I chose instead of BMW Surfer, I was really at quite a bit of a loss for some time, because Ghost is really good at communications, and I learned this during the WA NBS symposium that we did. He's just really phenomenal at managing NBS, and from the times that I've worked with him in the past, he's a competent editor and a skilled writer, and so it actually makes him perfect for the ministry, and I don't know why I hadn't thought of him before then. Really, it was more just that he hadn't been as active as some of our other members, but because Bob Reno was going to be Minister of Defense and BMW Surfer had indicated that he wasn't going to be as active, those were two of my deputies. Marcus Antonius was going to be Minister of Home Affairs, so I really couldn't pick him. And then Sirixia, I figured, would be more active in the Ministry of Culture, probably as a deputy. And so overall, that left me with really not that many choices within the Ministry of Communications. So I was figuring for some time I might pick like a complete newcomer to the ministry, like Peelt, who not many people have heard of, but who in the last few weeks has actually put in quite a bit of work, and who, interestingly enough, helped edit many of the articles for the Northern Lights issue 28 and the Roleplay Reel issue 1. So he was like quintessentially a part of that process, and so I figured he might be able to take it on. But I ended up choosing Ghost after I heard his performance at the WA symposium, and I think he's pretty much the perfect pick to replace me in that regard. As for the other ministries, I felt that Pridania was a pretty obvious choice, and Tlams has recently been doing a fairly decent job with the WA Affairs Ministry. I will say that within WA Affairs, I think we definitely need more staff, which is why I'm happy that Tlams has brought in a couple newcomers as deputies in that regard. And I do think that he should make more of an effort to get IFVs out on time, like right when voting starts, so that we can have more of an influence on our voters. And provide them the information that they need to make a deliberate, educated decision when it comes to voting, right as that voting starts. And then Mick Macedonia had indicated that he was happy to continue with Foreign Affairs, so he seemed like a good pick. Anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that answered that answered all of my questions. Obviously, it seems like a few of the ministries, do need some work, and you seem to have, at least with these minister picks, have kind of built a foundation of which to improve, like you mentioned. The WA, you need more members there, and definitely anybody interested, if you want to join WA Affairs, I'm not plugging anything, but But yeah, getting people interested in WA affairs, especially with the North Pacific having such a huge vote because of the amount of endorsements you will eventually have as in-game delegate. It's definitely something. Um, you seem to have a great foundation with the ministers that you've chosen. Um,
Yeah,
so when
thanks.
did you're welcome. When did you decide that the delicacy was going to be something that you were going to go for?
This may surprise you, but it was actually quite much earlier than you might suspect. Um, I have served in user-created regions as delegate for several terms. So I have some pretty good experience managing regions and knowing how to command basically the different tasks that need to be allocated. In the North Pacific, that is each of our ministries. But in UCRs, at least in the one I was in, we didn't have ministries. We just sort of had various different, focuses that we had to get towards. So I had decided pretty early on in my stay here in the North Pacific that I was interested in seeing how far I could get. I wasn't necessarily gunning for the delegacy right out of the box. I think I made that decision back in November of last year, and I had actually been speaking with Ghost to some extent about a potential run back in January, but I decided that it wasn't worth that for me because, first off, the timing wasn't quite right, and also I felt like I wasn't quite experienced enough for the role. It just felt too early to me, and so I figured that I would wait either 4 or 8 months, depending on if Ghost decided to run again, or if a very competent challenger came in for the May elections. And so I decided to wait 4 months, and I think it was definitely worth it because I gained consistency within the Ministry of Communications. We expanded our programs to include the roleplay reel, which I think, despite early criticism, came out quite successful. And I think the one failing through my time with Ministry of Communications was not pushing NBS hard enough and doing everything I could in that regard as well. But that's something that I now see as something that I can do during my delegacy.
So you basically ran unopposed. Yes, you did have someone else that ran alongside you, but you really didn't have anyone that really challenged you for the delegacy. If you could do the election over, who would you see to be that kind of challenger to you? Obviously, there are a ton of people in the region, but if they ran, who would you want to challenge you for the delegacy?
I think the situation regarding the indictment of Mad Jack was really actually quite saddening to me because I had been looking forward to him as a challenger in that race. While I disagree with many of the aspects of Mad Jack's platform, I think overall, had he not made the mistakes he had made, I think he could have been a competent delegate as well. I had also been interested in seeing Still Dorset run. I thought that was a possibility, but I think having some conversations with Still Dorset, I don't think he's really interested in the delegacy, but I might be very wrong about that, and I don't want to put words in his mouth. But he seems really good at vice delegate, and I'm very happy with him in that position. So that's not really a problem, but I actually kind of want to see what he would do with the delegacy. Sort of the two of them are the primary ones. And then I thought for some time maybe Praetor could run as well, if he had the time. And he would have been a very, very difficult challenger as well. But really, I think I would have wanted to just have a clean election between myself and Mad Jack, and then that would really give rise to more legitimacy in this term.
Gotcha. Do you feel, with everything that happened, obviously I can't comment too much of it on it because I am a court justice and the moderating justice of that case. But where was I going with that? How does it feel then? Knowing what you knew that you didn't really have. Does it feel any less like you won, or how do you feel about that?
So it took me a few days to really come to grips with that situation. At first, I was worried that it would affect the legitimacy of my term and my delegacy this term. But after sort of thinking about it for a few days, I came to the realization that nothing that happened in that situation was my fault. It wasn't that I had done anything wrong. It was really just a situation involving my political opponent at that time, and I don't think it'll affect the legitimacy of it. I'm gonna still push forward with the goals that I set aside in my campaign platform, and I'm going to try my best to achieve them to the fullest potential that they have. And ultimately, once the term is concluded, I think people will be able to decide for themselves if I was worth it as a delegate.
You mentioned SIL earlier. Now, the vice delegate in the North Pacific is a little weird because even though it shares a similar name to that of the delegates, their positions couldn't be any more different. But how do you see the vice delegates, alongside the delegate in your term? Do you see yourself working closely with SIL just because you're both security counselors, or how do you see the vice delegate role interacting with that of the executive?
I think, generally speaking, the delegate should work closely with the Security Council to ensure that the community is both protected and safe, and that we're keeping our numbers up. So one of the things that I really pledged to do in my campaign was do another endorsement frenzy. And that's something that should boost the endorsement numbers of all the security counselors, the vice delegate, and then the delegate as well. And that's an event that I'm going to have to work with the Security Council in order to plan and make sure that that is a successful event. I think that in general, it seems a little bit weird that the delegate would work very closely with the Security Council, because the Security Council is trying to make sure that that delegate doesn't become, a rogue delegate or a cooer of some variety. But I think that the protections are in place, and the Security Council has the tools to remove any such threat. And so it isn't actually a weird relationship after all. It's more of a sort of mutually beneficial relationship in which both sides, get the benefit of being able to work with each other and protect the region as a result of that. Instead of it being some sort of like awkward, under the table sort of conversation. And then being a security counselor myself now, it definitely makes us feel like one united team. And I think that's actually a really strong thing to have as both being a delegate and a security counselor at the same time. I think that's something that is sort of, I think it's beneficial to the viewpoint of the Security Council as well, because it shows that I'm not really sort of an aging nation who's in retirement, who's, just sort of sitting around in the Security Council. I'm still very much interested in regional politics, and I definitely want the best for the region, and I'm willing to act on those principles.
Gotcha. So, speaking of old people in retirement, would you mind telling us a little bit more about how, you kind of started in nation states? Because it feels like you just came out of nowhere in terms of, the North Pacific, but obviously you've been in nation states a while. You said you've been delegate of multiple UCRs. So whereas a lot of delegates have been, in the North Pacific for years, would you mind sharing with us a little bit more about what makes Fiji Fiji?
Sure. So I'm definitely a lot older in the game than most people seem to realize, but I'm definitely not in retirement. So I think in 2019 I turned 6 in NS years. So I've been in game for 6 years. And in that time, I've been in a few regions. I moved around a lot early on without really getting my grips in any particular region. I don't know if I spent any time in the North Pacific. I honestly can't remember. I do know I spent a little bit in 10,000 Islands and didn't understand their forums, and so left. And I ultimately ended up in a very unnoteworthy region called Skyholder Aerospace Inc. I think that's what it was called. And like within 2 weeks of being in that region, we merged into another region called Strategos Prime. And it was in Strategos Prime that I really got my footing as a nation. I learned the basics of the game and got into... I got my feet wet in all sorts of different areas. I ended up being the admin for our offsite forums. I had to manage that whole sort of branch of things. We called it the Minister of Science and Technology, which was weird, but unnecessary title. And I eventually became more interested in leadership. We had an intelligence agency called Strategos Prime Intelligence Agency, which ended up being sort of like an old boys club for the region, which wasn't by any means good. I think it was very fun for the active members to be, a part of, because we were watching people enter and exit the region. But it wasn't something that was ultimately good for us. We then also ended up having like a pretty active foreign affairs branch that was looking for other active user-created regions to, make embassies with them. And I became one of our lead diplomats. And I ended up speaking a lot with another region called the International Northern Union, which had a whole bunch of sister regions. And we actually got quite close diplomatically with them. And in doing so, we ended up creating a military branch. So I think it was called Strategos Prime Defense Forces or something, SPDF. And we were really, really dumb, like noobs at raiding and defending. And we, at that time, aligned ourselves with the moral defender. But because none of us knew how to raid, which is really what you need to know in order to defend, it's the same concepts. I ended up trying to infiltrate the Black Riders, which at the time was probably the single largest raiding group on nation states. This was before the Predator scandal as well. And I tried to work my way up the ranks, and I thought my whole plan was to even the game field, the playing field, and scale the ranks of the Black Riders until I became one of the senior leadership and steal the Predator script so that defenders could use it as well. But I was quite naive and didn't realize that this would probably take years. And after 2 months, I decided that this whole endeavor was fruitless because I had only risen to the rank of a private first class, which is like the first one up from basic. And it wasn't really doing well for my grades at school and whatnot because I was having to stay up until like 3 a.m. every day. So I stopped that. And but that is where I got my feet wet in raiding and defending, and I learned basically the principles that I still know to this day. And after a while, Strategos Prime, we had a whole bunch of role plays and whatnot, but it eventually sort of started dying. And I was delegate at the time when activity started fading. And I made the decision to merge our region into a couple other regions. So it was the International Northern Union that I mentioned earlier, and I think the IEU and the ISU and like a whole bunch of different like regions of this sister complex and us joined, and we became the International Northwestern Union, which I served in as delegate for I think 4 terms. We started off with like a constitutional convention, which lasted 30 days, which was incredibly heated because it was multiple different regions coming together and having to settle their different points of view. And out of that, I represented sort of the 55 most active people, which was all the people from Strategos Prime who merged over. And I ended up being elected delegate of the region for the first 2 terms in office, which was 8 months in total. And I think they were probably the most successful terms I've ever had as a delegate, because so much happened. We had like a very thriving regional culture, and our foreign affairs ministry basically wanted to expand and become more noticed on the international stage, interregional stage. And I don't know if that really ended up being successful, but we ended up opening embassies with a lot of GCRs and some of the more prominent UCRs in the game, including the North Pacific, actually. And I served as ambassador to, countless regions at that time. And, it was probably the most active delegate I can imagine having, because the responsibilities of that role included being basically minister of all the ministries at the same time. So it would have been like, being MOD and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Communications and, everything all at the same time. And I was also the senior editor of our regional newspaper. And that continued for a while, but at the end of 8 months, my term was up, and so I decided to retire at that point. And I sort of did. I sort of faded. I had a very clean cut with the next delegate, so they took office the literal day after I went in, because I just resigned the delegacy. So I resigned from the WA, rather, so that it would be immediate. And then over the next couple years, I got into college, so I was pretty busy with that, and I just didn't have as much time as I once had for nation states. But I would periodically come back and check on how things were going, and twice I ended up getting reelected as delegate to serve there. But each of those subsequent terms in office were nowhere near as successful as the previous ones. And I ended up always trying to fix whatever problems existed in the region, even if sort of the ordinary residents didn't want them to be fixed or didn't think that it mattered. And so over time, I learned that I learned a valuable lesson, which was basically to, only really care about something if there's like a sufficient backing for it, and or unless you really care about it, which is what I ended up doing. I was like, I really wanted to care about a whole bunch of things, because NS governments are why I'm attracted to the game. But the region was going in a more roleplay direction, and I didn't want to prevent them from having fun. So at the end of my tenure in the International Northwestern Union, I helped them redraft a constitution that would basically abolish the regional government and put the region on a course for just being a roleplay region, which made quite a few of the residents quite happy, and I'm happy to have served that purpose. But it was just no longer the region for me. And at that point, a lot of my old friends had left the game, and a lot of my old, I wouldn't call them enemies, but people who were irritated by me to a large extent, or had bad experiences with me in the past, were left. And I found it to be a really hostile environment towards me. And it just didn't make sense for me to stay there anymore, because the primary reason that I was interested in the game, which is NS governments, just wasn't there anymore. And so I decided to leave, and I did a bit of research on other regions I could join, and I ended up joining the North Pacific, primarily because the regional handbook was the most developed out of anything that I saw, and because at the lower levels it's a meritocracy, meaning that I can get my feet wet in a bunch of different opportunities and show off the skills and talents that I've learned and acquired over the last 6 years or so, 5-6 years. But then at the higher levels, it's completely democratic. And so, TNP, favors tradition, but it also is incredibly generous to newcomers. And I figured that I would have a chance at running for office if I came to the North Pacific as opposed to another region. That's why I chose the North Pacific. That should give you a fairly long history of my time on nation states, probably a bit too detailed from what you were asking for. But if you want to read more, I do have fact books on the matter that I've sort of collected over some of the years that recount some of the history of those delegacies that I've served in the past.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that much of an answer, but it was definitely, good information.
Sorry, I launched myself way into that.
I was like, oh my. Um, but you spoke what feels like hours ago about foreign affairs and the military. How do you see TMP, evolving in terms of its foreign affairs and its military?
When it comes to foreign affairs, I am very much in agreement with sort of the idea that the North Pacific benefits most when we perform positive diplomacy, which is when we, engage in cross-cultural activities, and when we make efforts to improve relations with other regions, whether that be through treaties or through festivals or through, radio, for instance, what we're doing right now. And as that applies to defense, I think that there's a real case to be made that the North Pacific should favor a more defensive posture. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be independent. I'm saying that I think our independent stance allows us to be more defensive, especially as I believe that follows with our regional interests more. What I mean by that is I don't think the more extreme aspects of raiderism are compatible with the laws that we have in the North Pacific, and I think that the more extreme versions of raiderism are ones that would be counter to those regional interests that I mentioned earlier. I do think that when it comes to like tag rating and detagging and whatnot, that's perfectly fine. That's just sort of standard operations and training procedures that we can have. But I think when it really comes down to it, liberations are going to be where the NPA will shine in terms of regional interests.
Gotcha. So you seem to be you lean more defender than you do raider, it sounds like.
I do. Part of that is due to the history that I have in the game, but most of it is due to the experience that I've had here in the North Pacific, and I truly believe that our values are or should be more defender than otherwise.
So you have a lot of experience in terms of the UCRs. Do you have much experience with, interacting with the feeders other than the North Pacific?
Generally, no. That's about it. What you've seen in the last 10 months is the experience that I have with game-created regions. The only thing that I would have besides that is the few ambassadorships that I held with the International Northwestern Union and other feeders. But those were very limited in nature, and most of the knowledge that I have of other feeders now is pretty much academic in nature. I've been reading a lot of forum threads, and every time I don't know something, I've been very willing to ask questions to people who would know, like Ghost or Sawale or Renaissancer, McMasterdonia, you name it.
Also, I must apologize to Balder, Lazarus, and Osiris. I just forgot that sinkers were in fact GCRs as well. I kept using the term feeders when I meant GCRs. So sorry, guys, that I totally forgot to mention the sinkers as well.
So are the war zones, right?
Yes, the war zones are also GCRs. They don't really. They're in that weird space where, yes, under the term GCR, Game Created Region, I mean, they're created by the game, but...
Also the rejected
they're
realms.
In that weird space. And I just keep forgetting everybody. Okay, anybody who's a Game Created Region, there you go. Great, I'm just forgetting everybody. Yes, the Rejected Realms is also another interesting game creator region because of the whole you can't be banned from the Rejected Realm. So, um, but yes, you're right. The War Zones and the Rejected Realm are both GCRs as well. It's just they're interesting things that happen with them because of how the game was created. Um, so let's see. I'm trying to find you gave me a very detailed answer for that one, and I just wasn't ready for all that.
Sorry about that again.
So I know it's very, very early to talk about it, but do you see yourself, if everything goes smoothly this term, do you see yourself as a two-term delegate, or do you think that,
I don't see why
you
not.
want to? Okay. So have you had anybody here in the North Pacific, or really in nation states in general, that you've kind of looked up to, or you would see as someone of a role model to you?
Definitely. Over the last 10 months, I have had the great fortune of befriending our previous delegate, Ghost. And I befriended him back in Sawale's term, before he was re-elected delegate. And he has served as a phenomenal mentor to me. And he's been more than willing to answer all of the many hundreds, if not now thousands, of questions that I've asked him over the last few months. And he served as an advisor to me even when I didn't necessarily need it. And I couldn't ask for a better friend on Nation States, and he's definitely someone I look up to this day.
Gotcha. And you seem like a pretty friendly person. Have you had your share of not so nice people within nation states?
Do you mean like times when I personally haven't been a friendly person, or times when I've interacted with people who have, been on a more hostile level?
The second one, the latter of the two.
Yeah, so I've had the fortune of most of my interactions being generally friendly with people. Um, Quite often, or well, occasionally, there will be people who think that I'm angry with them, and it's really not true. You'll know if I'm angry at you when I'm angry at you, because I make it pretty clear. And there's been a few people over the years who I've really not gotten quite along with, but all of them, in fact, like I don't think I can name a single one of them who's here in the North Pacific. Literally, all of them have been in past regions that I've been in. And the dynamic has always been interesting, because this was particularly the case when I served as delegate of the International Northwestern Union. There was a period in which a large group of people became very unhappy with the way things were going in the region. And I did my best to accommodate their voice, because I saw it as my role as delegate to try to unify the region and bring people together for a common purpose and a common cause. And that evidently wasn't happening. And they ended up leaving the region, and it was called the Great Split. You can read about it in the fact books. And I then dedicated the time that I had to trying to bring them back into the region by hearing their concerns and making compromises that would be enough to bring people back. And I was successful, and we remerged, but it was definitely a difficult process, and there were definitely still people who were unhappy with me through that period, but wanted to remain with their friends, so rejoined the region.
Since you mentioned it, why don't we talk about the first thing? Where have you ever been not as friendly as you thought you should be?
It's difficult to find a good example of that. I definitely know it has happened, though. Um, I think probably the best example of that would be right before I left the International Northwestern Union. Before we rewrote the Constitution, there was a whole period where there were a lot of people who were weirdly hostile to me in a way that I really couldn't explain, and it had become to a point where much of the lasting reputation that I had had from my two very successful delegate terms had basically run dry, and I had sort of lost all the trust that people had in me, but I couldn't find a reason for what I had done to deserve that sort of treatment. And I sort of snapped at a couple people, and it sort of ended in this sort of useless bickering, and I was like, this isn't productive, and it's not pushing the region forward in any meaningful way. And I sort of had to step down, or rather step aside for a bit, and take a breather and be like, hold on, you're not being fair to these people. Like, they probably have very legitimate reasons to be angry at you, and you have to hear their concerns rather than just rejecting them and being in denial.
Gotcha. Let's see. Trying to think of questions. I should have written some down when I was thinking of them, and the terrible memory. So, anything you want to share while I'm thinking of questions?
As far as this term has been going so far, the first week is definitely always about transition period to the new term, and hopefully I'll be able to get the in-game delegacy sometime soon. But the way things are looking right now, I think I've dropped endorsements since yesterday. I think I'm down 3 since yesterday, which is somewhat concerning. But the struggle continues. As far as ministries go, the first week has actually been a lot slower than I thought it would be. Marcus Antonius was on leave of absence for the first week, and I had forgotten about this when I appointed him. I still think that he's going to be a phenomenal Minister of Home Affairs, but the first week, of course, he was completely absent from the role, and while he did luckily take his oath in time, I'm really hoping that he can sort of step on the gas and get the ministry underway pretty soon. As for the other ministries, WA Affairs hasn't seen that much activity just because there really haven't been any resolutions waiting. None of them that are currently in the works seem to be able to make it to voting, so I don't think that's going to happen. And the Ministry of Defense has sort of been at home helping with the transition. I haven't actually technically ordered them home, but Bob Reno feels that I'm close enough to Sil Dorset at this point that it might be worth having people on the ground help with the transition.
Gotcha. Once you receive the delegacy or obtain whatever the word, do you plan to update the WFE to show any fun, colors or graphics, or do anything fun with the flag, or no, you're just going to be boring?
To be honest, I hadn't even considered it, so I guess that's a bad sign in terms of the creativity front. I probably will leave it the way it is when I first take it, but, now I guess I'll be thinking about it. I'll look into something. I don't know if I'm going to be able to deliver on that, but, hopefully it'll be something fun. Who knows?
Yeah, I remember Asta Silly String. She did the Pinkie Pie Raiders, I think is what it was a My Little Pony theme, to try to get her out of the delegacy. But yeah, we've had some pretty fun WFEs over the years, and hopefully, in your delegacy, you can come up with some fun things to make the region a little bit interesting for holidays and stuff like that. Speaking of holidays, do you have anything planned for any of our big holidays coming up, or are you kind of letting the Ministry of Culture handle that as they come up?
So for Democracy Day, one thing that I really hope to continue is the program that COE has been doing for the past year or two, which is the Constability Code, Kickstarter project. I think it's a phenomenal project for the Ministry of Culture to undertake, and it's something that I absolutely want to continue because it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen anyone do on nation states. Literally ever, period. And I've already spoken with COE about it, and he's given me access to a lot of the files that were used in the past years, and I haven't done anything with them yet, but I'm really hoping that I can be of help to him and sort of take a little bit of the workload off of his shoulders so that we can get that done on time.
Gotcha. Yeah, I really think that's one. I agree. That's one of the coolest projects that I've ever seen any ministry do ever. I'm always disappointed every year because my local post office hates how they're sent. So I have not received one yet. But hopefully this year, I'm crossing my fingers that my local post office does not send mine back. But yeah, that's a really cool way for us to celebrate Democracy Day, and especially now that our forum is,
Active and ready to go. Yeah, behaving.
Right. And especially since, the extras, if there is any extras from that, gets pushed towards, the forum stuff and everything else. And now, the admin have been very open about, hey, our forum costs money. So I'm definitely up to supporting the forum through Democracy Day and that fun project. So
the other celebration days that I think fall in my term are going to be Delegates Day, which is a long way off. It might not fall in the term, but it's 9th of September, which is like technically prior to like the new term of office. So I think I'll still be delegate at that point, despite the elections, which typically conclude like 11th or 12th, right? So I was hoping that we could get Silly String back on for Delegate Delirium. And then there's a couple Memorial Days, one of which is coming up really soon in May. But for that one, I don't have anything planned, and I honestly really should get on that with the Ministry of Culture.
What I should probably know this, but I don't. Which day is it?
I think it's the 26th, but you'd have to please don't quote me on that.
I know, but what is it? What?
I think it's called Manumission Day. It's like
okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's always confused me in terms of not what it's celebrating, but how to not celebrate. You know what I mean? It's always been
how to memorialize that. How do we,
right?
The simple act of having it as a Memorial Day means that more people are going to look and, read the history on that and try to remember it. But I wasn't around for that, and a lot of people weren't. Many of the people that we have now just simply, weren't there for the Pixie Dance, delegacy. And so it's difficult to think of a way to celebrate that in a meaningful way, but hopefully we'll come up with something.
Yeah, I remember we did some reenactments on the R&B in terms of, trying to reenact all that, but other than that, I don't know how else to. So yeah, that'll be definitely something you'll need to lean in to your culture team to figure out how to do that. Because you can't have parties or something for it because you gotta tie everything back to the holiday. So
yeah, that'll be difficult.
What is your favorite color?
Blue.
Like a normal blue or like baby blue or like a royal blue or
Like a sky blue.
sky blue? Got it. Favorite food?
Raspberries.
Do you have a favorite book?
Ooh. I've read so many books in my life. The first thing that came to mind, like lightning, came to mind, is The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein. But, yeah, I think that's probably my favorite book.
Yeah, I'm doing a lightning round now. I should have warned you. Favorite movie?
Gattaca.
And I was out of my lightning. Oh, favorite superhero?
I don't have one.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm pretty pop culturally dead. Like, just, take the biggest boulder you've ever seen and put me under it, and that's where I've been living my entire life. Like, I'm really glad that I had a favorite movie in mind already, because I've had to think about this question in the past. But I have not seen that many movies, and I certainly haven't seen that many superhero movies. So, like, you can pretty much ask me, like, if you've seen almost anything, and I may not have even heard of it. That's how far under the rock I am.
so I'm guessing you haven't seen Avengers Endgame, since you're not...
No, not even close. I have, however, heard of it because how could anyone not have heard of that at this point? But no, I have not seen it.
Right, it's the second grossing movie of all time. Hopefully it beats Avatar. I hate Avatar. But yeah, you're right. It's hard not to hear about it, especially since it's such a international phenomenon at this point. But yeah, the reason I thought of when I said lightning. I was like, oh, Thor, and so I was like, hey, favorite superhero.
Yeah, why not? But honestly, I've never, seen a Batman movie. I've never seen an Avengers movie or a Superman movie, or I don't even know what the other superheroes even are. But I haven't even read the comics behind them. So I mean, I'm just so disconnected from it all that at this point, there's just no point.
Gotcha. Well, I will let you know that Avengers Endgame, it was a very good movie. It was a little long. I think the pacing it could have been a shorter movie, but I am a film nerd, so that was me, criticizing it just a tad. Still a great movie. Please don't kill me, any MCU fans. How about Game of Thrones? Have you seem to be not into the pop culture, and that's pop culture-y right now, so I'm guessing not, but...
I read the first 2 books of Game of Thrones and very much enjoyed it. And I was starting the 3rd book at one point during high school, but like a big exam got in the way, and basically I just stopped reading it. And when I stop reading a book in the middle of a book, I always feel like the need that I have to restart from the beginning, kind of a thing. But by the time I got around to restarting it from the beginning, it had been so long that I didn't remember what had really happened in the first or second books either. So I committed myself to rereading the entire series. I was like, okay, I'm going to start with book 1 again. So I reread book 1. And I was starting book 2 when basically the same thing happened. And then a long time passed. And so I think I've reread book 1 now like 3 or 4 times. And I watched the show for the first 2 seasons. But I made this vow to myself a whole bunch of years ago that was like, I'm not going to watch season 3 of the show until I read season or the 3rd book, right? That ended up being a terrible idea because to this day I have only seen the first 2 seasons of the show and read the first 2 books.
Yeah, now they're on like the end of season 8, so
Yeah.
which I don't think they're following. No, I'm not a Game of Thrones person either, but I don't think they're following everything that's happening because I think they ran out of source material. So I think they're just kind of going for it now.
What I will say though is one of my biggest hobbies is board gaming, and I have a board game called Game of Thrones: The Board Game, which is based off of the first season, and it is a phenomenal board game. In fact, I hesitate to call board gaming a hobby of mine because it's really sort of who I am.
I never would have guessed you'd be a board gamer. It's very interesting. You don't hear that a ton. Like,
Yeah,
board gamer.
I love board games, and I am like so enthusiastic about them. I have a whole collection of games that most people have never heard of because there's a whole universe out there that people don't typically imagine that there is.
So, board gaming is usually, now you could correct me on this one because I'm not a board game enthusiast. That's usually like a multiplayer thing. Do you go to, like, do you hang out with people in board game, or
Yeah,
am I
that's
wrong?
what you do. You invite a couple
Okay.
friends over. You get a bag of chips or something. You sit around the table and you crack open a board game, and you enjoy like an afternoon together or an evening or whatever it is. Maybe you bring some beer, maybe you don't. That kind of thing.
Gotcha. You got to be careful with the beer though.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
um,
So, for
Let's
instance,
see.
like later this evening at 8 p.m. my time Pacific, I'm going to get three of my friends over, and we're going to play a game that I got in the mail just about a week ago, which is called U-Boat the Board Game, which is it's like a submarine simulator, which is going to be pretty interesting, I think.
Oh, was that it, or did you cut out?
That's all I was planning on saying. But if you want to ask more about it, I'm happy to answer.
I mean, this is pretty interesting. I didn't know our delegate was a board gamer. That's
Yeah,
pretty
so my
interesting.
favorite board game of all time is a game called Twilight Struggle, which is a two-player board game about the Cold War. And one player plays as the United States, and another player plays as the Soviet Union. And the game starts in 1945 with the conclusion of the Second World War, and lasts until 1989, 1990 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it's trying to emulate the titanic struggle for global dominance that was experienced between those two superpowers over that period of time. And it's a wonderful game.
Gotcha. So, do you think you'll be bringing? Now, I know we've been playing a little bit of Secret Hitler. Um, the last few. Well, it's been a while since we've played, but the last few days, are there other games out there like that you could share with your TMP community, or is that
So
that
yeah,
the
so
only one?
I'm actually kind of bummed out that we've been angering some of the RP community by bringing people onto the RP servers to play Secret Hitler, and I don't want to at all irritate them. I think our intentions were good, but we should listen to the criticism that we've received on that, and I'm hoping that we can still find a proper forum to play that kind of a game. Hopefully we can do it through the sort of games and entertainment tab, in TNP general. But if necessary, I'd be totally willing to create a whole new server for that task. So, as you know, there's Secret Hitler, but there's also a game called Spyfall that's great. Spyfall.crabhat.com. It's a little bit difficult to learn, but it's really an easy game once you figure the basics out. It's just difficult to figure out how you ask questions, and it's perfect built for like a VC voice chat type thing. Then there's nation states against humanity, or Cards Against Nation States, Cards Against Humanity, these sort of form of game that we could play. And I don't know of a whole lot of others, but I do know that there's Werewolf that we could set up, that kind of thing. Those are the easiest ones to play online.
Gotcha. Yeah, that seems very interesting, and hopefully we can play that with you soon. Man, it's been an hour.
Yeah, it has.
Didn't know we could both talk.
Well, at this point, we can chat if you'd like, and I'm free for another half an hour to an hour. Um, or we could just sort of end the broadcast here and, wish each other a happy afternoon or evening.
I think we can continue to chat. I don't see where that's any problem.
No harm done. Yeah, why not?
Right. Let's see. I got to think of things.
But if we're going to chat, I can ask you questions too, right?
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
All right. So, how have you enjoyed your time on the Security Council so far, or have you found it to be more of a duty and a burden of responsibility?
No. So I totally enjoy being a member of the Security Council. I've been a member on and off since 2016, I believe. So it has been something that I don't find it a burden at all. I usually go through waves of endorsements. So I usually, do really well, and then suddenly I find myself, 50 or 100 endorsements down. But I'm very good about, sending out mass telegrams and getting my endorsements back up. Just because, endo charting, if I don't do it consistently, which I a lot of times forget to do, I'll find myself, with having to endorse like 200 or 300 people, which, is time consuming. But I've definitely enjoyed, being on the Security Council. I joined right after I became vice delegate. And so it has been a very fun thing to do.
For me, when it comes to endotarting, I feel like for the most part I actually do it wrong. I try to stay on top of things on a day-to-day basis and endorse people, but I always fail to do the second part, which is sort of send the telegram after that endorsement saying, hey, can you endorse me back? And so for me, I'll try to remain at like 100% endorsing for as much time as I can, but after like a month or something, I'll have to go back and send that telegram to like 400 people.
Gotcha. Yeah, when I planned to run for delegate, I decided to buy Postmaster General because if you receive hundreds of telegrams like most delegates do, you kind of need that. And then I decided that I was going to telegram the entire region and say, hey, I'm running for delegate, just so you know. The issue was I had communication power at the time, which means that instead of using my 10,000 stamps like I meant to do, it used my communications power, which means that I just had 10,000 stamps now laying around. So that's really what I use for my mass telegrams is just I'm going to use all these stamps because I have 7,000 of them still left. So
Yeah, that's a bit of an error. Sending, a big telegram like that with the communication power, that's a risky proposition. And the fact that you had the stamps already purchased, like, were you able to, give that back to the region somehow? Or was there some, like, legal consequence to doing so?
So it's a thing that nation states is already aware of. But how the game works is, it's like, hey, you can use communication power for free, or you can, use your stamps. And it's like, well, why would you use your real money when we can just use the communication power that we provide you for free? So there's not like a separation. It's just like, hey, here you go. Here's your communication.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It was more just like does the telegram give you the option to use stamps, or does it just sort of automatically use the RO?
No, because I used the North Pacific region tag, it doesn't give you that option. So it's a thing within the NS code.
Okay,
But
gotcha.
usually, yeah, I had Goy, who was the AG at the time. He did reach out to me because I think they were going to go through legal action. But he was like, just prove that you've got the sufficient amount of telegrams, which I was like, here you go, here's my telegram purchase history.
Yeah.
And I bought 10,000 telegrams, so I was totally, and I totally would have used them if the game would have allowed me to click the other button, but there's not two buttons.
Yeah, so like if there was a choice between the two, then, a case for gross misconduct is like kind of understandable. But because there wasn't, I totally feel for you in that sort of a situation.
Yes, there also isn't a confirmation screen for when you're ejecting someone from the region. GBM figured that out when she accidentally ejected McMastonia from the region. So, yeah, NS does definitely have some things it needs to work out, but I'm not a coder, so I can't help them fix those things. So, yeah, any other questions you have?
How do you pick your name? Where does bootsie come from, and what does it mean to you?
So sorry, totally died there. So it's actually not chosen by me. It was actually a nickname that was given to me by Asta, who is Silly Strang. For those of you who don't know that correlation there, yeah, she started calling me Bootsy, and I was like, okay, well, if she's gonna call me that, then whatever, I'll go with it. So that's kind of where it's started.
What was your name before then?
Well, I had Buddha Hilly as a username, and then I forgot my username, or not my username, my password, and so I created another one. So I was Buddha Hilly 01, but then somehow the multiple accounts thing didn't set anybody off about my first account. So I had the two accounts on the forum, and then Buddha Hilly one became Bootsy, and then when we transferred over to the Zenforo forum, somehow my capital B turned into lowercase b, so now I'm Bootsy with a lowercase b instead of an uppercase b. So that's kind of...
Do you prefer the lowercase or the uppercase?
It doesn't particularly matter. It is a well, now I prefer the lowercase, just because that's what my forum name is. But I also understand that it's a name, so you would capitalize it. But whatever. Either way,
I've made that mistake in the past, but I've learned at this point that I think it's actually like a cool brand symbol, sort of. Like you're lowercase Bootsy, and that's who you are.
Right, that's who I am now. But yeah, I started in nation states in 2010. So, and I wasn't really active too much. But the first region that I was really active in was a region that is now gone, called, well, it's still around, but not active. It's dead. It's the region of Altera. And so they're a space themed region as well. So I helped out a little there and kind of got bored with that. So that's when I made my way to the North Pacific and kind of fell in love with it. Haven't been really anywhere else. So I'm definitely a TMP native, it feels like.
Yeah, of course.
Just because I've been here so long and haven't seen anywhere else that I don't have the time to expand outward at this point. I'm like, this is good enough for me. So
the North Pacific is very easy to fall in love with. And yeah, I speak from personal experience. This is probably the best it gets on nation states. I mean, as far as regional activities and the kind of fun and collaborative spirit that you can get with other nations and the friendships that you can form here. The only thing that I feel like you can get from a UCR that you can't get here is sort of that sort of self-starter, entrepreneurial, we have to build this thing from scratch. So writing your own constitution, writing your own legal code from scratch, and then trying to sort of build ministries from the ground up. And that's something that, I feel like almost fortunately we don't have to deal with here in the North Pacific. And then, recruitment is a lot harder in UCRs than it is here in, a GCR or at least a feeder, and in that sense, that's something that you don't want to. I don't miss the recruitment aspect of a UCR at all. It's just horrible. So what I'm trying to say is you're not missing out. You should stay where you are. North Pacific is wonderful, and I hope it stays that way.
Yeah, I wasn't planning on going anywhere. Yeah, going back to your Security Council question, one thing I do miss about, being WA mobile is, being able to jump and to defend, and I kind of miss the raiding and defending stuff, but, you can't have both, so you have to kind of pick. Do you want to be WA mobile, or do you want to be a member of the Security Council? So,
one thing I will say is that from a simple, out of character perspective, I really do like having, the extra time, because, raiding and defending, while really fun, is quite time consuming in my mind. And so, being WA stationary isn't that much of a loss for me.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, I'm pretty content about it. Just sometimes I'm like, hey, I'd love to, jump with, the MPA, or hey, I want to defend, tonight. But obviously, you can't do that as a WA stationary nation. So, for the most part, obviously, I'm content with my decision. But sometimes I'm like, I'd love to jump or to defend, or go back to the old days of, being WA mobile. So maybe that's my nostalgia talking. So,
do you ever see yourself running for delegate now?
So I've kind of been, like I said, 2010 was the start of nation states. So that would make this year 9. I've kind of gotten to a point where, I'm very content about, stepping aside and, letting others, such as yourself or Sil, or, I don't want to stand in somebody's way of being delegate because I want to be delegate. Will I count that out entirely? No. Obviously, I could have run very successfully against Sil. Was that last election? Gosh, time has flown. But ultimately, I decided that, hey, Sil had so much support that it was not worth it to, challenge him for the vice delegacy. So I'm not necessarily counting it out, but I'm content with, not doing that as well. Obviously, it kind of came out of nowhere that I was appointed as a global moderator, something I've been looking forward to doing, for a while, to help out both forum side and on Discord. So, definitely not counting it out. Very content if that never happens. So,
is global moderator a technical position? Do you have to know stuff about how the forums run, or is it more like a like a general moderator type position?
It's the sorry, it's the latter. Uh, Gosh, I keep the push to talk button. No, more the technical stuff is handled more by the admin, just because they have access to the control panel.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So Zenfora does have some additional features that our other forum did not have, but in terms of how that's going to affect moderation and administration, I don't know what they have planned, and I don't think they would like me sharing
Yeah,
what
no worries.
they want to do about that. So but yeah, for the most part, it is a more, like the name suggests, a moderation thing, not a technical ability thing, or else they'd be junior admin or whatever title you'd want to give them.
Yeah, I understand. Well, congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you. Yeah, I was a little shocked by it, but it, like I said, it has been something that I was like, hey, that's pretty cool. I was around the last time we had global moderation appointments, and I was like, oh, that'd be really cool. But then they haven't really appointed any in a while, and I was like, okay. Kind of with the delegacy, I was like, I'm content with not doing anything. But then they were like, surprise! I was like, yay! So yeah, but thank you.
Funnily enough, I actually considered you for Minister of Communications this term.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I definitely would enjoy serving alongside you. Obviously, I'm a justice now, but if you run for another term and you do need my help, I think you would be great to work with, Fiji.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was primarily driven by your history with Bootsie Radio, and I'm actually really glad that we're doing another episode of that now, because it was in great part due to your show and due to EBC Radio in Europea that inspired me to take a really active stance with NBS Radio and bring that back to life. And now that we've sort of incorporated Bootsie Radio with NBS to some extent, like we have it on the same platform, I think there's a lot of potential in this show becoming more active again, and we'd love to have you more on board.
Yes, EBC has definitely, I've been on there a couple of times, and that's really been kind of an inspiration for Bootsie Radio, and obviously NBS is also, slightly inspired by EBC as well. So it's great to see this all kind of coming into a banner of, hey, the North Pacific kind of has something very similar to EBC. And it's, NBS, and it's awesome. And yes, we've got some different things. So I'd love to see, some political talk shows, or, if Wondrous wants to come and do something related to, religious or, ethics or whatever. I could definitely see some different, or if Pridania wants to do something related to, sports or RP, or so I can definitely see a lot of people coming together.
I think it's just really cool, and if we can get more third-party people, joining in and making shows, we'll definitely have to specify that it's private media over, the sort of NBS like primary show that represents the North Pacific to some extent. But like besides that, like I don't see a reason why we can't have a lot of people coming onto these shows and giving people a platform in this way, because I think it's, when I joined the North Pacific, I already mentioned how Democracy Day and the Constability Code are like so phenomenally cool, Well, the second thing that I thought was really neat was that there was NBS, and it blew my mind that there had been, 10 or 11 episodes until that point. And I hadn't heard of EBC Radio at that time. And it's just such a neat idea. And, if it's going to happen anywhere in nation states, it may as well happen in the North Pacific, where we have, the people to do it and the commitment and the dedication to get the job done. And I think it would be pretty awesome.
I think NBS has a great future, and hopefully, Ghost is pretty good when it comes to communications. So I think he'll do very well as Minister of Communications, and hopefully gets us towards your ideal, huge NBS nation states thing, if you will.
What I'm really interested in seeing is... So I appointed Ghost for Minister of Communications because, as I said earlier, he's good at editing, he's good at writing, and he seemed fairly competent with the WA Symposium NBS that we did. But once he took office, he gave an opening speech that was basically like, Fiji did a great job with the Northern Lights. I want to do the same thing to NBS. And that sort of a vision and trying to push that boundary is exactly what I want to see out of the ministers this term.
Yes, I think the Northern Lights and NBS, I think if used efficiently, they're going to be very powerful tools, to get, because I see the Northern Lights as less of a foreign affairs kind of thing and more of a, hey, this is the best of the North Pacific. So I'm glad to see TNL kind of have some spin-offs, I guess. I thought Role Play Real was a really great idea. I was actually going to contribute an article. Fiji.
You can just do so next time. It's all right.
Right. Fiji definitely reminded me like twice, and I was like, oh yeah, I got it, and then I totally forgot. But I definitely, if there's another episode, I will definitely, I think that TNL, Roleplay Real, and there's one more.
The North Star.
Right, okay, yep, totally forgot that one.
But the North Star remains a government report. It's really simple to produce. Someone still has to do it, but it's definitely not the same sort of editorial quality as the other two.
Right. So, but yeah, having all those communication things will definitely be helpful to the North Pacific.
One of the things when we were looking over and reviewing the Northern Lights in the final days of last term, Praetor, I think it was him, gave the suggestion that we might want to have a table of contents for this edition because it was just so long. We ended up with, I think it was 9 articles, when the standard is 4. So it was like more than double what we usually have.
Nice.
In fact, if anything, it was too long, I think. It was like 22 pages long. I can't see anyone, like sitting down and just reading that in a single sitting. Like, that's a legitimate magazine at that point. So, while I do think that it pushed the boundaries a bit and it shows us what's possible, I think it shows us what we probably shouldn't do in the future. But nonetheless, it gave us a lot of experience, and it allowed me to help train some of the newcomers in the ministry on, because it was such a huge task. I just couldn't do it all by myself. I had to have people help me. So I think overall it was good. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add, Fiji? No, I'm good. Thanks so much for your time. Of course. Everyone, this has been a edition of Bootsie Radio. This was Fiji. Have a great night, or day, or whenever. Yeah, sure. Enjoy your day, folks. Thanks for having me on the show.